Hi, everyone. This is Beverly Price with Her Empowered Divorce and the Divorce Coalition Live. I am bringing today just an incredible guest with so much information that can help in two subjects, one in divorce and one in domestic abuse. She's one of the most popular podcast hosts. She's an author of an incredible new book called The D Word, and she can share so much from a domestic abuse survivor's point of view going through the divorce. So without further ado, Kate Anthony, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you so much for having me, Beverly. I really am very happy to be here and talk about these important issues.
Yeah. A couple of things I would like to introduce to the audience before we get started. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background? And second, could you tell us about your wonderful book that I have a copy of, by the way?
Absolutely. The book, I'll start with the book. The book is called The D Word, Making the Ultimate Decision About Your Marriage. And it is really a how to make this decision manual. It is, and the reason I wrote it and the work that I do is that my background, as you also asked me, I was married. I was with my ex-husband for 10 years. We've been divorced for 15 years now. But I was in a very emotionally abusive marriage. I was, at the time, we had a 3-year-old. I was working as an actor. I'd been an actor my whole life. I was working on I was on Grey's Anatomy. I'd been on Grey's for a couple of years at that point.
I love it. What character? What character?
Nurse Kate. I was a nurse that recurred for a few years in the beginning, in like the first 5 seasons. And so I was, one would think sort of kind of at the top of her game in a sense. And at the same time, I was suffering from a crippling amount of paralysis in my internal life. I was questioning if I should stay in or leave my marriage, and had been for many years, because I was, what I didn't know at the time was that I was being abused, and that I was so gaslit and so confused, and I was so out of touch with any part of myself that really felt empowered at all.
Right.
And yet, at the same time, here I am on a hit TV show, right? And so this just sort of speaks to us, in a sense, that this can happen to anyone.
Right.
And
I can relate for sure.
Right. And I was really in the depths of despair. I was trying to decide whether I should stay or go. And we were in group couples therapy, which is a thing. And there was a man in there who had been divorced before. He was now in his second marriage, and still is. And I asked him, I said, how do you know? How do you know when it's like you've finally done enough? Because I kept thinking there's just one more thing around the corner. Right? There's one more thing we haven't tried. This one couples workshop, this tantric sex workshop that it was kind of ridiculous, but also I think very common, right? If I pull the plug now, I will have missed the one thing that would have been the thing,
right,
to fix it all. And I asked him, I said, how do you know when it's time? And he said, when you know, you'll know. And I was like, that's not helpful.
I wanted a different answer.
I'm asking for the burning bush. Where is it? And so ultimately, when I knew, I knew.
Right.
And I had a moment where I was standing in my closet, and I was sort of vacantly kind of standing, staring at the clothes and desk bunnies. I mean, whatever, right? As I was spending so much of my life in this sort of daze. And suddenly I did know. And what I knew was that I had to leave for my son.
Mhm.
I knew that if I stayed in this marriage, my son, who was 3 at the time, would turn into an abuser,
Mhm.
and that he would prey upon women like me who were ultimately codependent, right? Didn't have a sense of self, or had a sense of self and it was gone.
Right.
Whatever it was, that this was 100% the blueprint that we were handing to him. And in that moment, I knew I had to go. And over time, after I sort of went through the whole process, and I started to really feel like there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better answer than when you know, you'll know.
Mhm.
And so my book is really the antidote to
Awesome.
when you know, you'll know. And also, there's a lot of truth to when you know, you'll know, because everyone does come upon a point, and there is information that you need. There is sort of a cultural unfolding of this unraveling of this whole thing that you need. There are conversations that have to be had that can speed up the process.
Mhm.
And that's really why I wrote the book.
Wow. So many women, I think, go through very similar experiences that it's almost like if I could just do one more thing. Now,
Right.
the tough part of that is that also kind of assume, doesn't it, that we are in total control of whether the marriage works or not,
Right.
when there's a
Yes.
whole
That's
other person, right, that's got a part and
yeah.
needs to be willing to work for something,
That's right. That's right.
right?
And I was being told at the time. So at that time, we were in couples therapy, we were in group couples therapy, we were each in individual therapy, we were both in 12-step programs, and we were both doing like all sorts of other like workshops, like personal development workshops on the side.
Right.
And in the personal development workshops, I was constantly being told that I could fix it, that I could be the one.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, they're like, relationships aren't 50-50, they're 100-100. And so if you just bring all of yourself and the 100% of yourself, then you can fix the marriage. And that's a really dangerous thing.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
believe that is a really dangerous thing to say to people, because it does presuppose that if you change yourself enough, that if you love them enough, right, that you have control over the entire relationship dynamic. And that is false.
Yeah, I think of it as you're asked to sacrifice yourself for this thing that maybe the other person doesn't even want.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. Yes. And it's funny, I was just talking to a friend of mine. We were talking about the dangers of like the fairy tales, right? Because we always
Mhm.
talk about like, oh, we were raised on these fairy tales, and the happily ever after, and nobody teaches you how to get to happily ever after, right? But one of the things we were talking about Beauty and the Beast, and how dangerous that story is.
Mhm.
That it's a model of kidnapping, isolation, taking her away from everything she knows and loves. But the most dangerous message in it is that if you love the monster enough, he will change.
Right.
And as a domestic violence survivor and victims advocate now, I know that that is completely false and really dangerous.
Exactly. Exactly. Because 99 times out of 100, they do not change.
That's right.
Yeah.
They they're not interested in changing. And
Right.
so, and what that is, it's a one way, it's you're siphoning energy out of yourself into the relationship for this fantasy that they're going to change for you. Like, I don't want someone who is a monster who's going to change for me. I want, a fully formed human being who loves and respects me while I'm in the cafe reading my books, thank you very much,
Mhm.
who doesn't have to kidnap me and take me away,
Now,
right?
what I learned, and unfortunately, I'm one of those people with multiple marriages, with multiple abusive partnerships.
Yeah.
And when I started to do the work on myself, what I learned was that I thought that a man would kind of fill the hole in my soul, just like other things
Right.
on the outside would. And so I went from one to the other, looking for
Right.
feeling better, and it didn't happen. And it was only until I learned that I had to learn how to fill that hole that it could
Right.
change, because mine also did the very romantic, love bombing, sweet talking, treat me nice the whole time we were dating and engaged. And
Right.
literally, like the day after, a switch flipped.
Right.
And it
That's
was
right. And it's
totally,
that is so common, unfortunately.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you, and I think part of our stories is not only this relationship with the abuser, but then is the divorce process. What do you wish, or I should say, I've seen a lot of research that says that many victims feel re-traumatized
Oh, yeah.
by the divorce experience.
Absolutely.
What
Yeah.
do you wish judges knew, attorneys knew about victims and survivors that they may not know now?
Pretty much anything. They really don't know very much. And that is a really big problem, that there is no mandatory training for family court judges. The people who are making the decisions in these cases are not trained in recognizing the signs, and they don't understand the dangers.
Right.
This endangers women, it endangers children, and
And
they're
men who are abused too, right?
sure, absolutely, yes, of course. Although the numbers are much less. So,
Right, right.
um, and I work with women, but yeah, but yes, everybody, of course, absolutely. Um, and so I think what's dangerous is that when women claim that they have been abused, they are not believed more than they are believed. Sorry, Beverly. Hold
Exactly.
on a second. My son is walking in the door. I'll pick that up again.
Hold on. Let me pause.
So when women or abusers, but particularly women, make claims of domestic violence, the court believes them less often, uh, uh, less often than not, right? So
Right.
they're overwhelmingly not believed. And so that's dangerous, right? But also when they claim domestic violence, they also have a higher likelihood of losing custody of their children,
Right.
which is even more devastating. Um, and I think what I want family court professionals to know are to recognize the signs of domestic violence, and I want them to understand that perhaps 50-50 custody is not always in the best interest of the children. I want them to really
Exactly.
understand what is in the best interest of children. And I also don't know that it's necessarily taking them away from another parent, right? But if there is a history and a documented history of abuse, for God's sake, that is not a safe person. I also want people to understand that post-separation abuse can be far more dangerous and deadly than the abuse in the marriage, because it is at the moment that an abuser has lost control, which they have done. If we're in divorce court,
Exactly.
they've lost control. Now they're going to use the court as a weapon of abuse.
Right.
And I think that if more judges knew that, they would pay more attention, because I don't think they want that. I don't think that judges want their court to be used and leveraged as a tool of abuse. But I also think that they don't know enough to recognize how that might be showing up
Absolutely.
in their courtroom. So really what I want is for domestic violence to training to be mandatory in for all family court professionals, including attorneys and judges in particular.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that I've had so many experiences through coaching my clients of hearing about different trauma behavior from attorneys, from even a woman's attorney asking her, did she make it up, to an interview with a judge saying he didn't believe domestic abuse was that big a deal because he thought false reporting was a bigger issue. So if you
Wow.
think about that kind of misinformation span, look at what the uphill battle we have is to educate. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that is right. And therein lies the problem.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, yeah, I mean, the idea that false reporting, it's like, this is why women don't report abuse. This is why we don't report rape. This is right, because we're far more likely to not be believed than believed. And then the trauma of that is like, was worse than anything else. So I mean, ultimately, I think that there is a movement afoot, and we're all part of it, to really try to shift things with family court, and a lot of reform needs to happen. And I think that we're doing a good job. I mean, the fact that Caden's Law was introduced into the Violence Against Women Act,
Yes.
the fact that these laws are being passed, slowly,
Right.
Jennifer's Law in Connecticut, where, Jennifer Dulos,
Right.
murdered, presumably by her husband, after she begged the court for protection and didn't get it. Then we've got Peaky's Law passing in California, on, all of these laws named for dead people.
Right.
By the way, many of them children. So Caden's Law is named after an 8-year-old child whose father murdered her in retaliation against the mother. The same as Peaky's Law, right? So all of these laws that are based on Caden's Law, every state has one coming up in their legislation, each of which is named for a dead child. Like, I don't know how much more information we need.
Right.
But so we do have a bit of a groundswell. And I think it's getting louder and louder. I think Catherine Kavanaugh was a really big one, right? Now that we have the internet, we've got this change afoot. What I think we still need to do is educate. Unfortunately, we still have to educate victims about how best to enter into the court.
Absolutely.
And understand the chances of being believed. And so if that's the case, what is the strategy? And really helping victims understand that a judge doesn't know anything, right? A judge simply sees two people in his courtroom. They don't know who to believe, and that they are really neutral. And so if that's the case, right, you have to have solid evidence, first of all, very, very clear-cut evidence. It needs to be presented in a very unemotional, almost detached way, that begging and pleading and crying and being, quote, hysterical in a courtroom is probably going to backfire on you.
Exactly.
Right? That there is a there is a mindset and some trauma work that needs to be done before going in to a courtroom so that you can present yourself in the best light possible with the highest chance of being believed. And I understand that what it sounds like I'm saying is that women have to, be unemotional. We have to bend ourselves into pretzels in order to conform so that we'll be believed. And like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And it sucks. And it's anti-feminist, and it goes against everything I believe in. And also, that is simply the reality of where we're at. And if you want any chance of protecting yourself and your children, there's a very narrow lane that you can walk in. And so it's important to work with someone, a divorce coach in particular, like you, like me, who understands this and knows what the narrow parameters are, because your divorce attorney does not, and the judge does not. Right. So you need somebody who is an advocate, who actually is trained in this and understands what those parameters are, if you have any chance of
Absolutely.
Of protecting yourself and your kids.
Yeah. I like to share with my clients that it's communicating for results versus communicating the way you want to communicate.
Yes.
So it's all about, will you be believed? Will they see the patterns? All of those kinds of things. I totally agree with you. Totally agree.
Yeah.
In that regard, going back to, let's say, the professionals, the court and legal professionals, if that's the reality of the scenario, what can, let's say, attorneys do to support that client rather than to push them away or traumatize them or belittle them? What kind of behaviors might be good for them to take on if they haven't already?
A little empathy would go a really long way.
One, right?
Yeah. A little empathy would not hurt. I mean, I think that what attorneys really need to understand, and mediators, and all of anyone who is in direct contact with the client, is that while this may be your 576th divorce case,
right,
this is their first. They don't know how it works. They don't know what to expect. They are going into this feeling like they should get what's right, which is not the reality of the court.
right.
And so the very first thing I think it's really important to help your clients is managing their expectations and saying, I hear you. And there are all sorts of things that you deserve and that would be righteous in this case. And here's how the court tends to work. And so, given that, here's how I think you need to best present yourself and your case. And I recommend that you work with a divorce coach who is trained in this. Like, I want attorneys and mediators to include us in their team.
Exactly.
Unless they are trained in it, unless they've gone and gotten certified as a domestic violence victims advocate, then like, great. But I think there needs to be a little more hand holding of the emotional fragility, and while also managing expectations, right? So, and that's a tricky line, right? To say, yes, and yes, I hear you. Everything you're saying sounds terrible. This is the reality in court. And so how can I want to work with you to make sure that we present this case as clearly as possible in a way that the court can hear it. Yes. It's almost like the attorney needs to be the translator. There's the like, but he's horrible and he did all these things and he's scary and he hurt the kids and blah, 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 into, okay, here's a legal strategy that we might be able to work with. And also managing the expectations that I get that he's scary and I get that he's, or he's introducing women to the kids too soon, and no judge cares about that.
Right.
Right. And to really, I keep coming back to the same phrase, really managing their expectations about what does the court actually care about? How do they normally rule? How does this judge usually rule in cases like this?
Exactly. I think another element of that is how the attorney presents a case knowing about that particular judge. For example, if a judge is typically empathetic or considers domestic abuse, I would say more accurately, versus there's no way in hope that this guy is going to, or this girl is going to see the story because they don't even acknowledge that domestic abuse exists. So how do you, as an attorney, navigate the dance with the judge? Not only you have a dance with your client and a dance with the other party, And then I think about many attorneys, I think, are taught to approach everything without emotion, right? It's just facts, it's law, blah, blah, blah. So interacting with someone and then needing empathy, woo.
Yeah, right. It can be challenging, and that's where we come in. Not to beat a dead horse, but it is where we come in. We bridge the gap between emotion and strategy. We help our clients metabolize or process the emotional aspect so that we can spit it out the other end in effective strategy and bring that to your attorney, right? That's what we're essentially trained to do. And I don't think most attorneys are not trained in that, right? And so it's kind of a no-brainer to, when emotions are so heightened, to work with someone who is trained in that. Because first of all, from the client's perspective, it will save them money.
Right.
It really will. And from an attorney's perspective, it's going to save a lot of headache, right? And work that you may not be qualified to do, frankly.
Right. But still, so many say, well, my client doesn't have a budget for a coach.
Yeah.
So that's a challenging thing. And usually what I say to that is, can they afford not to?
That's right. And look, I am not going to, I'm not going to bypass the fact that many people cannot.
Right.
They simply can't. Which is why we have podcasts, which is why we have our Instagram pages, which is why we have online programs, like all of the things, right? There's a lot of content out there. You've got to be, if you cannot afford to hire one of us to be in your corner and to be your advocate, then you've got to advocate for yourself. That's very hard when you're so emotional. And
you're so
it's
beaten
possible.
down.
And you're so beaten down.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, right? So, and right, let's say I think there is a, can you afford not to? There's also but how much more are you going to spend on your attorney asking them questions at $750 an hour?
Exactly.
That, I'm going to answer for a lot less, or that will be part of our package or whatever. When I work with my clients, I work with them on let's keep that list of questions for the attorney to send at the end of the week so that you're not firing them all off every minute, right? And let's see how many we can answer without going to them. So there is a matter of saving money on attorney's fees by shifting that over to a divorce coach, which I think is going to get you further. And there are people who simply literally simply can't afford it. And they also
Right.
can't afford attorneys. And so
Right.
like, that's where you're going to have to do your best due diligence.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we have a lot of information, right? You know,
right.
that's why we do what we do. Mhm.
Yeah. The other thing I think is these judges can have, oh, I don't know, 30 or 40 cases a day, and they
Sure.
may not all be family court or domestic violence or both oriented. They could be hearing criminal or civil or whatever. And so to try and get their heads to zone in, then I think that's another expectation we need to set with the client is what this person has to deal with and what
That's right.
they may be bringing to the table.
I mean, absolutely. And so also, so therefore, let's say, you know, there's a case that's been around for a while and the paperwork is like this thick.
Right.
What's on the top page? Right? Every time you go into court, you have to write your declarations. So how are you writing your declarations in a way that really keeps the meat of it and what's most important on top?
Yes. Because
Right?
who's going to read a file like that?
No, like they don't have time. As you said,
Right.
it's a revolving door. They literally don't have time. They look at your case. I mean, I've been in dependency court a number of times, not for me, not for me and my child, but I have gone to dependency court a number of times, and you've got the attorneys running out and saying, okay, who are you? You're this person. Okay, this is your, okay, great. We're going in now.
Yeah.
The attorneys don't even know.
Yeah, like driver's court or something.
Right. Yeah. So these are, you know, these are the things that we go into this, we're downtrodden, we're beaten down, we don't have almost any energy left. And then we're basically saying, and now you have to get a PhD in family law and how to, right? And it's like, are you kidding me? And also like, I'm not.
Exactly.
I'm not. And so listening to podcasts like yours, like mine, just scouring Instagram, following Dr. Christine Cocciola, you know, following me, following Beverly, following all of the experts so that you really get a sense of how this works.
Yeah.
Tina Swithin, One Mom's Battle, right? All of this. It's the most important thing that you can do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I so wholeheartedly agree with you on that. Given that most abuse victims come into this process, as we said, feeling downtrodden, what do you advise them that they can do to, you know, I kind of think of it as here's a normal feeling, and you come into this as underneath. So your day is starting out in a negative position. How do you get them to at least come up to how we can start our day so that they can be an advocate for themselves?
Absolutely. It's a great question, and it's really important. First of all, trauma therapy, somatic processing. Trauma lives in our bodies. It does not live in our brains. You cannot talk therapy your way out of trauma. You've got to do somatic processing work. Tina Swithin loves to say, like, put your divorce up on a shelf, take it down for an hour a day, and then put it back up on the shelf. Do not keep yourself mired in it 24/7.
Yeah.
It's entirely too much. Set up a separate email account.
Exactly.
So that you're not getting, so that you can, at the end of the day, you can light a candle, you can, you know, do some meditation and then open the email, see what you've got to deal with, close it, and move on for the day. Make it a ritual so that there's like an opening ritual and a closing ritual.
I like that.
So that again, in your body, let's say opening, we are lighting the candle, we're creating the space, we're holding the space, we're dealing with the difficult stuff. And then when it's done, you're blowing out the candle. You're blowing it out. You're blowing out the stress. You're blowing out the, the difficulty and everything. And you will come back to it tomorrow. But for now, it's done. And have that ritual of blowing out the candle be part of letting go of whatever it is you've just experienced.
I love it.
As much as you can, protect yourself, right? Another thing that Dr. Ramani talks about a lot in her new book, which is wonderful, called It's Not You. And it's all about how we, if you're the victim of abuse, it's not your fault. It's
Right.
not you. And she talks a lot about, and so does Tina, about radical acceptance, right? Acceptance does not mean that you're agreeing with or you're co-signing or anything like that. What it means is that we are no longer fighting against who this person is.
Right.
And so often in the divorce process, we really are trying to fight against who they are. We are constantly still trying to get them to see our point of view. We're constantly trying to get them to just understand, if they would just, right, and which makes us more vulnerable to abuse, by the way. But if we radically accept that this person is who they are, they are exactly who they have been showing us to be, which is really hard when you thought they were somebody else. But when you radically accept who they actually are, you really give yourself a break from trying to change them. And
Exactly.
it can you just sort of take your hands off and go, okay, it's a surrender. It's a surrendering to what is so.
Absolutely. I like to use the phrase, don't let him rent space in your head.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely.
And so the more you can, this is about really the most ultimate acts of self-care. Radical acceptance, really getting to know and understand how the court is and what it's like. But really I think the somatic processing and the trauma therapy is really, really important. EMDR is great for this. I've worked with clients that I have had to send to a trauma therapist because we actually can't get anywhere. Because when the trauma center of your brain, which is the amygdala, is activated, and if you're in fight, flight, or freeze, the executive functioning part of your brain doesn't work. Literally, it goes to sleep when the trauma center comes on, and that is for preservation. And you can't strategize without the prefrontal cortex being able to function.
So how could you advocate for yourself, right?
There's no way. And you can't work with a coach. We can't have strategy sessions so I have said to clients, we need to pause our work, and you need to go to, I have recommendations in various states, but call this person because we need to get you out of this state before we can even begin to strategize.
Absolutely. And I think it can be compounded for those that had trauma prior to marriage, like in childhood and everything, that this all of a sudden triggers it. And it's 100%. Almost a multiple effect.
Literally for all of us, right, Beverly? I don't know anyone who didn't have childhood trauma, certainly not of our generation. We're all screwed. Absolutely. Usually that's the deal. Usually we choose the person that most mirrors our childhood experience and our childhood wounding. And, and so all of this trauma is compounded. It is complex trauma, and it has got to be worked on. I would say before you start strategizing and moving through this process, if at all possible, unless they're sort of railroading it through, then concurrently, which is harder, but it's also possible.
Absolutely.
And on the other side of this, by the way, you will be the biggest badass you ever knew yourself to be.
Yes. Yes. Kate, thank you so much for being with me today. This has just been absolutely so informative. Can you share with the audience how they can find you?
Of course. Everything about me is on my website, kateanthony.com, including my book, The D Word, Making the Ultimate Decision About Your Marriage. There's a page on there that will help you figure out how to buy it if you need to do so in secrecy. If it's not safe to show up in your shared Amazon cart order history.
Mhm.
And my podcast is also on there, and also anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. And I'm over on Instagram at the Divorce Survival Guide.
Awesome. Thank you again, Kate. And thanks to the audience for listening to Kate and I today. All of the information about Kate and myself will be available in the show notes. Join us each week where you can learn more about how to deal with domestic violence and abuse professionally and personally. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.